Anything to say?
Yeah, sorry, Allah.
Authorities say they will only be eligible for early release in 2015. And in the meantime, they've urged the young men to use Madiba Month to show that they're truly sorry for their crimes. That comment clearly irked Van Schalkwyk and Teed's lawyer. She insists that the two have repeatedly shown how sorry they are for beating an unknown man to death.
Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, and thank you for joining us here again today. So this is another subscriber suggested case, and I just want to thank you again for your suggestions. When looking up this case, it made me feel extremely sad and also very confused as well. It's sad to me because the victim of this case is still unknown and has never been identified. But this case also confuses me because of the 4 men involved in this case, the amount of violence and hatred with men so young, and also just conflicting reports that I read later up on this case, which also confused me as to whether or not the 4 boys actually went to jail for the right man. But it'll all make sense once we start talking about this case, and that's enough babbling from me, so let's get into it.
Intended for mature audiences only.
This case starts us off in Pretoria, South Africa, in a place called Waterkloof. Waterkloof area in Pretoria is apparently very lani, very expensive, and just a very nice area to bring your children up and for families to reside in. Around this area is a very well-known and very prestigious high school, and this high school is Hoërskool Waterkloof, which is Waterkloof High School in English. It is an Afrikaans high school and is just very well-known and very sought after for the families in the area. In 2001, the current principal at the time was Dr. Becker, and he had a son named Christoph Becker who actually didn't go to Waterkloof High School. He went to another prestigious high school that was also in the area. I think maybe he didn't want his son in the same high school as him because Christoph was known to be a naughty troublemaker, and maybe Dr. Becker just didn't want to have to deal with that because maybe nepotism comes up and he just didn't want that kind of stain on his reputation. But like I said, Christoph Becker is known as quite a troublemaker, and he now attends this other prestigious high school. But Christoph had a very close group of friends, and the 3 boys that he was friends with all went to Waterkloof High School. So we have Christoph, who is all by his lonesome in this other high school, and then we have his 3 friends who are here in Waterkloof. His 3 friends were known as Frikkie Dupree. Frikkie's dad was a doctor, and his mom actually worked in the Waterkloof High School as well. Then there was Gert van Schalkwyk, and Gert was absolutely obsessed with becoming a rugby player. This was his dream, and that's all he wanted in life. And then there was Reiner Tit, who was actually good academically. He was very smart, and that was what he brought to the group. So we had Gert, the rugby player, Reiner, the academic, Frikkie, I don't know what he brought, but then you had Christoph, who was the naughty boy. So these 4 boys were all friends, and they were very close. Gert, Frikkie, and Christoph were all the same age. They were 16 years old, except Reiner, he was 15 years old. And these boys were, I guess, typical teenagers. They loved to have fun, they loved to play sports, and they just loved making noise and going to parties, and that's exactly what they did. On the 2nd of December 2001, the 4 boys decided to go to a party, and they actually split up and went into separate cars. So 2 of the boys went in a BMW, and another 2 boys went in a Toyota. So they were kind of tailing each other on the way to the party, and the 2 boys in the Toyota decided to pick up another one of their friends on the way, and so now there were 5 of them. So 2 boys in the BM, 3 boys now in the Toyota. Now, I kind of assume that these boys were driving illegally because our legal age is 18. Yes, you can have a learner's license at 16, but you can't drive on the roads legally without a licensed driver next to you. And none of these boys were close to 18 at that stage. So now the 5 of them are now heading illegally to this party. They get to the party, and all of them now start drinking. And they drank a lot, mind you. So before I kind of get into exactly what happened, I do just want to give a little bit of background context. And the South African police services were going between these prestigious high schools in the area, as well as other schools, but was particular note to the Waterkloof schools in the area because there were a lot of break-ins in that area. And the police were just going around to the schools asking the kids, if you see anything, say something. Let us know because we want to catch this guy who's breaking into the houses. So just let us know if you see anything. And these 2 prestigious schools were obsessed with giving back to the community and instilling in their kids to make sure that your community has stuff. You need to give back and you need to help. And that's what these 2 schools try to do and try to teach their kids. So that's just a little bit of backstory, and just keep it in mind. So the 5 boys, they now get tired of this party and they're like, okay, we're bored, let's head out. So for some reason, the 4 close friends, they get into the BMW and they leave this unknown guy that they pick up on the way to now drive the Toyota. So the 4 boys in the BMW now leave, and they're like, okay, cool, unknown friend, we'll see you again another time. And the Toyota then drives off separately. The 4 boys then get to an area called Constantia, and they park outside this area, and they kind of notice a guy just hanging around, loitering, and the boys now stop the car and they watch him. And this all happened outside a gym in Constantia. So the 4 boys then decide, oh, this man's dodged, let's all get out of the car. So now the 4 boys are like hyping each other up, and they start running towards this man who's minding his own business, and they all now run and punch this man. This man was beaten incredibly badly, and he was left in quite an horrific state, but he was left alive. The 4 boys then run back into the car, and they then drive off. Now this next part just makes me incredibly sad to think about, because the next man that these boys attacked must have thought, actually, what the hell is going on? So the boys then get to an area near a public park, and they see another man who's now walking towards a really big tree. And I want you to keep in mind what I'm describing. They saw a man walking towards a big tree, okay? The 4 boys then get out of the car. 2 of them walk towards the boot and grab 2 knives and a hammer. Christoph then walks up to this man and he asks him, do you know where this particular road is in the area? And before this man could even turn around to show Christoph where this place is, Christoph then punches him twice in the side of the head. The man then stumbles, he falls to the ground, but he manages eventually to get back up, and he starts absolutely running for his life. Remember, I told you that Gert actually wanted to be a rugby player one day, and he clearly tried to put his rugby playing skills to the test. He ran and absolutely tackled this man. The man is now lying on the floor. Reinach then comes up to this man and kicks him in the side of the head. He also then takes the hammer that the boys took out of the car and starts hitting him with the hammer as well. Christoph then stabs the man, and this man is now absolutely begging for his life. He's begging for them to call the ambulance. And as this man is begging for his life, Frikkie then walks up to him and says, oh, do you know who Naas Botha is? And before the man could even understand what he's going on about, Frikkie then kicks him so hard in the head, just as you would when you were kicking a rugby ball in a match. The boys then threw their knives deep into the park and they ran away, but Reinach kept the hammer and he took it home to keep it clean. The boys could not care less about the man that they attacked in the park. They seemed to then go on and live lives like it was absolutely normal. Now this next part I find quite interesting because it just shows a little bit of inconsistency in the stories. Christoph, remember, he was at a different school compared to the other 3 boys. So Christoph had friends in the school, and he was actually friends with 2 brothers, and he kind of confessed to these 2 brothers about what happened that night. And one of the brothers, Christoph, asked to actually go back to the park and get the knives that the other boys had thrown on the grass. So the one brother agrees. He goes to the park and he actually sees the dead body before police have even gotten there, and he sees just how horrifically the boys had beaten him. The one brother was so shocked about what he had seen that he just left the park and said to Christoph he didn't find any knives, he doesn't want to get involved. So eventually the next day, police did find the man in the park, and sadly he had passed away. And because the man was never identified, he was laid to rest in a municipal burial ground. And in South Africa, our municipal burial grounds are not marked, so he's in an unmarked grave and he's unknown. Police did perform an autopsy on the gentleman, and they did find that he was 1.7 meters tall and he weighed 59 kilograms. What is important to note is that the pathologist found that he was actually very well fed. He had very good nutrition in his body, even though he was quite slim. He had a few tattoos on his body. He had a snake on his forearm, the word Mamba written on his forearm. And he also had a few other tattoos, such as the word Rambo. He was also wearing a checkered shirt, a tracksuit top, and then a red jacket over it. He was wearing shorts at the time, and when the pathologist looked closer at his body, they found that he had a shaved head, and he did have marks on his head, but they were already scabbing over at the time, so these were not fresh wounds. He also had no injuries to his teeth, his tongue, his eyes, and also none to his neck. The man was also wearing jewelry, and there was a wallet found in his pocket, but unfortunately there was no ID found, but it was full of money. So just keep that in mind for later when we get to the trial. So remember I told you about Christoph's friends, the 2 brothers. Now the one brother who actually went to the scene and saw the body, he absolutely went on a downward spiral after seeing this, and it took around 2 years later after everything happened that he eventually confessed to everything, because his parents noticed his grades were slipping, he was depressed, and they actually wanted to find out what was wrong. So he went to a psychologist, where he eventually confessed to a psychologist. The psychologist then brought in his parents and told his parents, And his parents were absolutely horrified at what he had confessed. And what they noticed is that he kept saying it was Christoph Becker, it was Christoph Becker. And sadly, with this case and the murder of this man, the 4 boys that were involved, the parents of these boys absolutely wanted nothing to do with it. They kept saying, listen, nothing happened, no one's getting questioned about it, so why even bring it up? Why are you even talking about it? Let's just drop it. And Christoph's friend, the brother, his parents were not happy with this at all. His dad actually went to the police and confessed to everything because he said that he wanted to bring his kids up knowing right from wrong, and he didn't want his kids to just sweep this under the rug and think that everything would just be okay, because it's not. So the police opened a case and they went full steam ahead into a full investigation. But remember, I said this was 2 years after the actual incident occurred, and all of the boys had actually grown up and they had moved on with their lives. They had all matriculated, and Reinhard actually got a bursary to study overseas, and he was no longer in South Africa. He was actually in America at the time. Christoph was studying to be an actor, and the other 2 boys were having their gap years and just living their lives. And police really struggled with this case because, yes, they had a confession from someone, but there was a murder for a body that they didn't even identify as anybody. So police really had to dig, and because they were digging, they found conflicting information. And remember, I said everything was really confusing? So let me backtrack a bit. Remember, I told you that the boys, when heading to this party, picked up a random guy and they were traveling in 2 separate cars, the BMW and a Toyota. And remember, I told you that Christoph was really good friends with 2 brothers who were in the same school as him. So apparently, the reason why I said that there are 2 different stories is because these 2 brothers actually went to the same party as the 4 boys and the random unidentified friend that night. So instead of the Waterkloof 4, they were actually the Waterkloof 7. And later, the brothers actually did confess that they were there that night that the Waterkloof 4 attacked the man in the park. And the reason why they got into that situation is that Christoph actually called them up as backup. So the boys did arrive and they then saw what was occurring in this park. But it was ultimately decided by police that because there was so little evidence on the 2 brothers and the unidentified guy, that they would actually give these 3 boys immunity, because without the one brother's testimony, there wouldn't have been a case. So they wanted these boys to be witnesses and to say everything that happened that night. But very interesting how these stories are constantly changing and constantly getting mixed. So in August of 2003, warrants of arrest was sent out for Gert, Reinhard, Christoph, and Frikkie. And remember, Reinhard was in America, so he actually got expedited back to South Africa for this trial. So because this was 2 years after these boys were still in school, they were all now technically men who were from wealthy families. They were all handsome and they were all well known in their community. And the media absolutely loved these 4 boys. And Christoph and Frikkie were constantly seen as very arrogant in front of the media. They were constantly posing for pictures. They were constantly flexing their muscles. And they absolutely loved the attention. The 4 boys were all then defended by the same lawyer, and this may not have been the smartest move, because if you have one lawyer and you're all kind of being done together, then if one's found guilty, you're all guilty. But throughout the trial, the 4 boys never really denied that they ever attacked the man in the park, but they denied that they used a knife, and they also denied that they used a hammer on this man. And the judge asked them, why did you attack this man? And the boys said that because this community and trying to protect the community was so instilled in them at school, they saw this man apparently running with a TV in his hands, and they just had to act on it. They just had to defend their community. But what they did deny is that they attacked the man outside the gym on their way to the park to attack another man. They completely denied that attack, and they really believed that they never murdered this man in the park. They just beat up a man in the park, and according to them, they never knew that he had passed away. And police actually never have proof that these boys did beat up the man that was in the park, because he was unidentified, and technically it could have been done by anybody. But the boys were given a plea deal. If they pleaded guilty, they would be given a lot less a sentence. But the boys were like, no, we didn't do it. We're not taking this plea deal. The judge was like, okay, then you'll be tried on murder and grievous bodily harm. So the 4 were like, okay, we plead not guilty. And the 4 of them then received bail on 10,000 Rand each. So the trial started on the 4th of July, 2003. And the 4 boys were absolutely not fazed by this trial at all. They were laughing, they were chirping, they were talking. And the judge even said to Christoph, can you keep quiet? And Christoph then looks at the judge. He looks behind him. And he's like, you're talking to me? And I mean, come on. And during the trial, unfortunately, the brothers and the unknown boy who were given immunity, they were not exactly the best witnesses. It was 2 years after the actual incident, and also there had been a lot of alcohol that was consumed that day. So their stories were not exactly linking up, and they were sometimes not making sense. And this entire case did rest on these witnesses because there was no one else there. They had not identified the man who had been murdered, so there was actually nothing they had on this case. So it was really important that they got it right. There was evidence that showed that the boys' cell phones were quite close to the park at the time because of the cell phone towers. So with a lot of back and forth between the prosecution and the defense, the judge ultimately decided that he really did believe the witnesses of this case, and that there would have been too much of a coincidence for the boys to confess to beating someone up in the park, and that there would also be a dead body that ended up in the park on the same night that the boys said they beat someone up. Even though they could not prove that the man that had passed away was the man that the boys had beaten up, there was too much of a coincidence, the judge said. And during the trial, the judge did say to Christoph that he is incredibly arrogant and that he lies about almost everything. So the judge did find Reinhard, Gert, Frikkie, and Christoph guilty of murder. And once they were actually found guilty of murder, panic started to set in because the boys were now throwing each other under the bus. There was no more camaraderie or brotherhood between the four boys. And the boys did blame the media for a lot of how they were kind of portrayed, and they said that the media made them look arrogant. The media was asking them to pose in these ways, and that they just looked like arrogant rich boys. And then in 2007, their sentencing was finally handed out, and they were given 12 years in prison for the murder of the unknown man. The judge did give an explanation for why the sentence was so lenient, in a sense, because he said that they were minors at the time. They were also highly intoxicated at the time. They were also in a group which he believed kind of led to a mob mentality, where if one boy did something, they would kind of want to show each other up and be, oh, mine's bigger than yours, I'm better, kind of thing. And as soon as the sentencing was handed out, their defense lawyer actually applied for an appeal, and the appeal was granted, and all four of the boys were let off on bail, and they were actually free for a year, and they were only asked to start their sentencing in 2008. While in prison, Frikkie, Gert, and Reinhard actually got degrees while they were there. And in February of 2014, all four of the boys were released, and their friends and family were so happy that they were all out. And remember, they only started their sentencing in 2008. And when these boys were released and they walked out to open arms of their friends and banners and laughing, this picture just shows how the community that they lived in and their friends really thought that what these boys had done was so minimal and so water under the bridge. No one really cared about what they did. And when the three boys who got degrees in prison, Frikkie, Gert, and Reinhard, actually left, they almost walked straight into managerial positions, and no one batted an eyelid. Christoph moved to Cape Town, where he started to try and get his acting career going. And remember I told you when the autopsy was done on the unidentified man in the park? The pathologist described the man as wearing jewelry, he had money in his wallet, he was wearing very nice clothing, he was well dressed, he was well fed, but the media kept saying that he was a homeless man. And I'm not here to judge, I'm just saying that if this man had a lot of money, he had jewelry, why would they think that he was homeless? Unless he just actually became homeless that day. We don't really know the circumstances, but the autopsy report and the actual findings, some of them just don't match up, especially where she said that she found markings. Like she said she didn't find any on the neck or the head, but Reinhard and Frikkie kicked him in the head. Maybe they were so drunk that they didn't realize where they kicked him. Maybe they thought that they kicked this man in the head, but they actually missed. All the autopsy that was leaked was not the actual autopsy of the man that we're talking about. And these are all probable scenarios in my opinion. And like I said, the man who was described by the media was described as homeless, but he's still an unidentified and faceless man to everybody. And I do not understand what possessed these four boys who were children basically at the time, 16 years old, 15 years old. What possessed them to hurt and murder someone they've never even met? There was so much anger and so much hatred in this case. It was so unnecessary and so disgusting. There's clearly some form of pack mentality between these boys. And what really makes me sad about this case is that because this man is unidentified, his life was taken in the park, and he may have had a family. There was a ring found on his finger. He may have had a family. His family is still wondering why or when he's coming home, why he didn't come home, and he's buried in a nameless, unknown grave that no one will ever find him in. So that just kind of, I guess, pulls at the heartstrings a bit, that no one will ever know who he is and his family will never know where he is. But I did read up on one website where, remember, the judge said that it was most unlikely that the boys would not have killed that man in the park because it was too much of a coincidence. But remember, the autopsy doesn't match the injuries on this man in the park's body. So is this actually the man that the boys did beat up in the park? Did the man that they beat up get up and walk away? Was he really homeless? Was he really carrying a TV? Or did they just pick on someone because of clear hatred and anger and pack mentality? And are they actually guilty of murdering someone? I do think that they should have served longer in jail for even just randomly walking up to people and attacking them. But it's just something to think about, I guess. And that is the case of the Waterkloof 4. Thank you very much for suggesting this case. Let me know what you think of it down below. Thank you again for all your suggestions. Please keep safe. Please don't talk to strangers, and I'll see you again next week. Bye.